Committee meeting for Monday, February 28th, 2022 will come to order, and I would ask the clerk to please call the roll.
And as a reminder to all who are in attendance and who are watching, this meeting is being live streamed and recorded on the county's YouTube page. Calling the roll, calling the roll, Mr. Miller.
Here.
Mr. Tuma.
Here.
Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones is absent at the moment. Mr. Gallagher. Mr. Schron. Mr. Schron is absent. Ms. Baker.
Here.
Ms. Turner.
Here.
There is a quorum.
Thank you very much. The next item on the agenda is public comment. Has anybody signed in?
No, Mr. Chair, no one is signed in.
Okay, and we'll go on to item number 4, which is approval of the minutes from the February 14th, 2022 meeting. Do we have a motion relative to those minutes?
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion from Councilwoman Baker and a second from Councilman Tuma to approve the minutes from February 14th. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed say nay. The ayes have it, and the minutes from February 14th are approved. We go on to 2 legislative items referred to committee, starting with Resolution 2022-0008.
Resolution number 2022-0008, declaring official intent under U.S. Treasury regulations with respect to reimbursements from bond proceeds of temporary advances made for payments in connection with the development of a new county jail.
Okay, thank you very much. That item is before us, and I would call upon the administration to present this legislation to us as they see fit.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
This is Greg. Just a kind of a little bit of an introduction, if I may, since we don't do this very often. In fact, the last time I can recall that we did one of these was when we were working on the hotel financing so many years ago. This resolution is just to satisfy kind of a requirement within the Treasury regulations that if we do ever eventually issue debt to pay for the jail, this resolution makes the bond market aware that we intend to reimburse ourselves for costs that we may be incurring before those bonds are issued. It's a little out of the ordinary with capital projects like that, so this is something that you put the market on notice with, that we intend to do that. It covers capital costs. Typically that's thought of as when you put a shovel in the ground, or the cost of acquiring the site. So we want to be sure that when those things ultimately happen, that we have this notice to the bond market in place.
So what you're saying is that this legislation does not require us to do anything. It simply gives us some flexibility as to how we handle the financing.
No, that's correct, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you.
Council members, in connection with this piece of legislation, we thought it would be a good idea to just provide just a general overview of how we're thinking of the financing for the jail project in its current state. For the record, Bob Franz, I'm the county's financial advisor with Stiefel Nicholas. Just like I said, what we're thinking about today, how we're thinking about things relies a lot on assumptions. What we're assuming in our analysis and thoughts and plans right now is what everyone knows is a $550 million project as of today. That's what we're aware of, and funding the project in 2022. Not a lot of concrete information, but that's kind of where we're basing how to pay for it, how to fund it. Will these items change? Absolutely. Will these be wrong? 100%, but we got to start somewhere. We got to start with a set of assumptions, and that's where we're going. You know, as the administration and has said publicly and stated publicly, as everyone is aware, we intend to extend that 0.25% or present legislation to this council at some point to extend that 0.25% sales tax to help pay for the jail, as well as operational savings. But at this point, nothing has been presented to council. So again, this is our assumption on how to pay for this jail. The existing 0.25% as a just as a review of that tax as it stands today, implemented in 2007, expires at the end of 2027, currently funds obligations relating to the Convention Center and the Global Center, the Hilton Hotel, and a portion of the Cavaliers financing that was done in 2017. After 2027, so beginning in 2028, there are no current or expected obligations looking to the 0.25%. So as of January 1, 2028, if the 0.25% were to be extended, it would be essentially free and clear of all encumbrances or say-tos at that point. Like I said, we intend to, what our model, our assumption here is that we extend the 0.25% sales tax. That funds a portion of it, the majority of the debt, and the estimated operational savings funds the rest. And we intend to issue debt to fund the project. Now, that's very similar to how the county has funded projects in the past, how other local governments in the county, the state, and across the country fund these large capital projects. All issuing debt is just like a home mortgage. You take your future earnings and you build your house today. That's all we're doing, is taking that future tax from the 0.25% and building the jail today. So that's kind of, in a very simple term, in a very simple phrase, that's kind of what we're doing. When we're putting the financing together, these are the three main tenets that I'm kind of working through and helping the administration work through. Is funding the project. Obviously, we want to do that so we can build it, but minimizing risk to the county and limit the impact through 2027. Clearly, if we don't have the ability to capture, $2028 today from a cash flow perspective, we want to limit the impact to the county. It's just that simple. So how do we do that? There's a number of ways, but the way that we're looking at doing that is through the debt issuance, through the structuring of the debt, limiting the impact from 23 through 27. So in this table, I'm very simply just separating out those two time periods, 27 through 2023 through 2027. And then starting in 2028 through the final maturity of the bonds. And estimated debt service cost in that first section there of $43.5 million, funded by lawfully available funds, which is essentially, if no other source there, that's general fund reserve, $30 million. Operational savings, $13.5 million, to total that $43.5 million. Will these numbers change? Absolutely, no question. Because when we get to the bond structuring component of these items, it relies on the capital markets at the time, status of the capital markets, the acceptance, the credit, the project, the amount. So as of today, this is a very simple illustration of kind of how we're viewing it and kind of how we're at least trying to minimize the impact there. Beginning in 2028, when the sales tax revenue would have funds available to start paying a larger portion of the debt, we're looking at about $35 million a year or so, give or take, but just rounding it at 35. Again, sales tax from the 0.25% extension and operational savings of about $9 million a year. So about $26 million from the sales tax and about $9 million from operational savings. Again, these are all based on assumptions. I don't want to understate that. I don't want to dwell on it, but all of this will change. There's no question. But I just wanted to simplify it, put it into.
Number's going to stick at 550 million?
I can't say what the budget is. I don't know. That's the latest that I'm aware of is the 550 million from.
If I may follow, does that include the courthouse?
With Public Works. As far as the 550, that's still our budget right now. Obviously, we're still in flux with the location and the bed count, so things could change, but that is our target that we're working towards. And then that does not include anything related to the courthouse. That's just the jail.
So what are, is that just in question in your presentation? You said there's really nothing else out there that we need to spend the 0.25% tax on. So how are you planning for the courthouse? Is that just not part of the conversation?
I think that was never presented to Bob at this point. It was just because we don't have a finalization on what we're doing with the courthouse, right? We just restarted the discussions, and so we're still in that programming phase. So is that a possibility that that could come out of there? I think that's the case.
And do we have any idea what about that number that's added to the 550 or 600 million?
So the number that was presented to the steering committee was, gosh, around 800 million. I'm looking at Councilman Gallagher just because he was there with us. But, I mean, it's high right now, so there's a lot of tweaking to the program that would probably need to be done, and then figuring out what range we would think is acceptable. But, yeah, there's a range of budget depending on options. So we're still a bit further behind on the courthouse than we are on the jail as far as determining what that budget would look like.
Yes, Councilman Gallagher.
I think I can help a little anyhow. We just have started discussions on the courthouse, the Justice Center, justice in whole. We're still awaiting Cleveland as far as if they're going to participate. They're 30% of the project if they do participate. The last meeting that we had, we told them that, and I believe the plain dealer said it was sticker shock, and I understand that. So right now, this is just the jail. I'd love to know the whole cost, but we're not there yet.
Right.
I guess the only question is that it's not that it may happen, is that we do have to do something about the courthouse, whether it stays in the existing building and gets renovated, which seems unlikely, or a new location, or, I mean, it's not like it's in question.
Yeah, I think everybody understands that something needs to be done. It's just a question of what. And so that's what the latest meeting that we had was kind of presenting all the options, you know, whether it's a rehab in place, a rebuild in place, and then what exactly it needs to look like. So we're just not there yet, I would say. We kind of stalled a bit during COVID on the courts just because, you know, being able to meet with them and everything. And the jail was the most urgent need that we felt, so we've moved ahead with that.
So if I'm understanding, just as a really rough estimate of 800 million, you're talking 550 million for the jail and another, is it 250 million?
No, it's actually 800 was the high end of a court.
Oh, that's just the court.
Correct. Wow. So
550 for the jail?
correct. Right.
It's a huge number.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not one we can't.
So that's where, you know,
Look.
even with the jail when we first started, you know, when you put everything that you could possibly want and what it could be, you know, you have a big range. So we have a big range of the courts. Would it come into that? I would think not that high. But there's some work to be done still.
I'll have other questions, but I'll wait if someone else has.
Okay, so I'm going to put out a few questions. How long of a bond maturity are we talking about?
Councilman, the revised code allows counties to go out to a maximum of 40 years. That would be, and I think the non-straightforward answer is, you know, obviously we're not there yet, but these numbers would assume a 35-year bond. We can always go shorter than that. But when you issue debt, you look at the maximum life allowable under the code, under a Ohio Revised Code, which is 40 years, and then you factor in what you're financing. So if there's a lot of what we call bricks and sticks, a lot of bricks, mortar, concrete, things with really long lives, that brings that average life out to 40 years, and that's where you start from. But as you start to include furniture and equipment and things like that, you bring it down. You bring that average life down. So I'm just assuming 35 years as of now. But what that ultimately looks like, I think that will be a moving target, depending on a lot of the discussion with council members of priorities and needs and cash flows and what we can live with, what we can't, and how it all kind of fits together. It's kind of putting like a kind of a jigsaw puzzle together to get to the exact formula that we want to get to. Because if we want to extend the term, you have lower annual payments. But if you want to shorten the term, you have higher annual payments, just like a 15 versus a 30-year mortgage. So it's a cash flow versus cost balancing act.
If you shorten the payment, if you shorten the time frame, you end up paying a lot less interest.
That is true, yeah.
So you mentioned about the 0.25% sales tax not having fixed obligations past 2027. But I would note, and I'm asking you to correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that we currently do use some of that money for operating expenses. And so if we used all of the 0.25% sales tax for debt financing, we would have to find some other way to fund those operating expenses that are currently being spent from the 0.25% sales tax. Is that correct?
If that's the case, Councilman, then yes, we would have to have that discussion.
Do we have a time frame as to when? Well, this isn't for you. This is more for the administration. So I'll defer that question. My final question for you is if you could review the timing aspects of this legislation as to for how long it can be in effect before bonds have to be issued, and how long prior to the passage of this legislation can you bond out expenses that may have been incurred prior to when this legislation passed?
And the legislation you're referring to is the resolution in front of you today?
That's correct.
Okay. You can look back.
It's 60 days. The look back is 60 days.
You can look back 60 days from the passage and capture those expenditures and reimburse yourself from those. And my, because I'm not a tax attorney, my safe harbor, my conservative understanding is you go out 18 months and then you can capture those expenses up until you issue the bonds, obviously. So there's a lot of but-fors and a lot of exceptions and a lot of additions of going out to different terms for different things. But I always use the basis of looking back 60 days and going forward 18 months.
So then generally, we should be pretty confident that we're going to issue the bonds within 18 months before we pass this. Would that be correct?
Mr. Chairman, can I jump in here a second? Because the
Yes,
reg
you
is
may.
actually the later of 18 months from when the expenditure is incurred, or 18 months after the date the project is placed in service. So that would depend on, give us up to 18 months after the jail is open and being used, but no later than 3 years after we've incurred the expense. Just that's to clarify. I know he's got a safe harbor, but I was just reading from the regulation. Just
Okay, that's helpful.
Question then?
Yes.
Okay, so after the items drop off, which is, well, I don't know if you have it here, what drops off in the 2027? What expires? The convention center?
Convention center and global center financing, that has a final maturity in 2027.
Okay.
The obligations of the general fund and to the 0.25% into the CAVS transaction.
Okay, and it's also 2027? Okay.
And the financing for the hotel drops off from an annual payment from about $20 million a year down to about, I think it's about $6.5 million a year. So, and that was done to accelerate as much as we could during the 0.25% time period. So after 27, the beginning in 28, the majority of the debt is expected to be funded from priority payments from the Hilton operations at that point.
So with that dropping off and the 0.25% sales tax equaling to 52 million, what percentage are those facilities make of that 0.25? How much can we expect will drop off to go towards the jail a year? Because as Councilman Miller said, there is dollars that 0.25 goes towards other things. So
And
what is left? How much are we anticipating we're going to be dropping off that can be used for the jail?
So using that $52 million number,
Right.
Anywhere between, and it kind of depends on the success of the hotel as well, but anywhere between 48 and 52 million would be freed up at that point.
48 to 52 million? So most of it?
Yeah,
Yeah. So pretty much all of it. Okay. So then we can, after 10 or 15 years or whatever time we choose to finance, that 0.25 can drop off and not be a detriment to the county at all for any services that are now needed by that 0.25.
Yeah, based on my understanding of that, yes, that's correct.
So
Yes.
I'm going to break in at this point and say that my understanding is different. Bob France is right in terms of specific legal obligations. The sales tax money is freed up, except for the possibility of some residual requirement on the hotel financing. However, and I can't put an exact number on it, but I know that we're not using all of the 0.25% sales tax for debt service. We're using it, some of it for ongoing daily operations of the county, and as far as that money is concerned, we would have to find some other way of paying for those services if we're going to use all of the sales tax for, or almost all of the sales tax for debt service.
We need to know that number. We need to know what the percentage is. You're thinking most of it, you're saying, so what is that, 10%, 15, 20, 25% of that 0.25? How much is going towards the operations of the county that we're dependent on right now? And how much can we take to pay for the jail, which was originally for the medical mart? That was
all in the general fund They're not broken out separately.
So, Director, let me try the question this way. How much of the 52 million from the 0.25% sales tax are we currently using for debt service?
My understanding is 52 million. Well, let's break that out and provide you with the number.
Okay, if that's the case, well, then I would stand corrected.
That would be a good thing, I think.
Yes, okay.
All right, well, thank you for that. I do have another, if you don't mind.
Please proceed.
We don't talk about the ultimate justice center that we are vacating for the new jail and probably removing the courthouse too. So with that building being completely vacant and not really having a use for the county, do we have any idea what that's worth if we put it on the open market for the, I mean, that could be also dollars that can be put against the jail ultimately. I know it would take time, but ultimately.
Nicole English again with Public Works. No, we haven't looked at that at all just because we're so far out from there. I mean, the jail, is still several years away before that would be open, and then it would take how long to do the courthouse. So we haven't really, obviously that's an asset that we have. We'd have to look at the demo plan and what would happen with the site, but we haven't even gotten to the point to say the courthouse is leaving there. It could stay on site in some fashion, so, but you're right, it is an asset.
I think it, for conversational purposes, even if we had a range of what type of money are we looking at, is it worth 200 million? I mean, what would someone pay for prime location on the corner? Maybe they would raise the building, maybe they would use it, I don't know. But I would think that just in the conversation of what it is we think we can expect from one facility leaving to another facility that we're going to gain, we could have some idea what we think on the low end and the high end of what we think that building.
Yeah, we could look at
net
rates now and surmise. we're probably, I would say 10 years out before you'd be totally off the site. But yeah, we could have our folks look at that.
Yeah. Okay, we just kind of put that question out there that it is an asset that I think we're going to be able to hopefully sell and be done with it. Okay.
Director, do we have a timeline as to when the administration expects to present legislation on the sales tax to the council?
Council Miller, I'm not aware of a timeline yet. The last conversation, I believe, Chief of Staff mentioned going out ourselves for council to prepare the legislation.
So, to Mr. France, how important would it be that the sales tax legislation be acted on before we issue bonds, assuming that the sales tax is going to be one of the sources for repayment?
Councilman Miller, I'd say it's vital.
Vital, okay. Good to know. Okay.
One more, if I may.
Please.
Great opportunity to ask a few questions. Based on the 52 million that perhaps both of you are suggesting that that's what would be freed up, and taking the 550 million we think we're going to need to build a jail, how many years will it take if we took the entire 52 million a year to pay off that jail? If we were to be aggressive and said this 0.25 is dedicated towards the jail and we're financing it for 550 million, how many years would it, not how many years can we finance it, but how many years would it take to pay that jail off? And you can get back to me if that's...
I'll get back to you on that.
Okay. I would really be interested in knowing that, though.
Yeah.
I have a general idea, but I don't want to.
Okay. I think it's important that we would
I
know
also
that.
have a general idea, so you can talk to me after the meeting.
Oh, it'd be nice to have maybe a little more than general, just for planning purposes. If we're, we could take it over 40 years, but if you can pay it off in 15 or 12 and save all that interest and be done with it and hopefully drop the 0.25 completely. That would be a nice thing to do. And it would be good to tell people that's what we're doing. Thank you, Chair. I appreciate the time to ask the questions.
So I particularly tried to structure this to provide an opportunity to ask some pretty broad level questions. And so if there's any more, people can certainly bring them forward.
I have a question.
Yes, okay.
Chair. I know at some point the county would still need to find money to renovate the hotel. Do we know when that would happen and where that money would come from?
Yeah, I think the what, 7 million is in the budget. That's what's kind of been on reserve against the fund balance. In terms of how and when, I don't believe that has been really addressed or decided at this point.
Thank you.
We also have floating out there the question of the convention center and the former medical mart, where a number in the mid-40s is being put out there. So that's also a financing question.
And if I may, Chair?
Yes.
And when we say there's nothing else out there that we think is going to be needed after 2027, what is the plan for the Global Health Center if we were to invest the 46 or 48 million? Is that a fair question?
Yeah, I think the general idea is to incorporate that structure into the convention center for meeting rooms.
Right.
For that type of function to help augment that service. From what I understand, based on just watching the board meetings there's a demand for that type of area.
How is that going to be financed?
We haven't really gotten there yet.
So that could be another bond issue that is out there that, so, yeah. So between the courthouse, the health center, and the jail, we could be more at 500 than 550 million. A lot of fluid there. Okay.
So, to my colleagues, I'd like to suggest a course of action and see if my colleagues agree with it. I would point out that so far we've only incurred fairly modest expenses in the grand scheme of things for the jail project. We've been paying Jeff Applebaum and his operation for their consulting services, but up to this point, these are expenses that could easily be absorbed by the general fund and not add to what we have to borrow, and so I don't think that passage of this legislation has to be immediately. And I would also note that we're waiting to get a better sense about the jail site as to and see whether we're going to have we probably should know one way or the other in the next 3 to 4 weeks, or maybe a little longer, as to whether we have a site that we can move forward on in the short term. Is that a fair statement? Yeah. So my suggestion is that we simply hold this in committee for a little while and see if we can get clarity on site. And if we get clarity on site, then at that time I think it would be the right time to move forward on this legislation. So,
if I may,
yes.
one One more question, given I have you both here. Just in the conversations of all of our assets and what we're going to be doing with them and how much we're going to invest in them to bring them up to date and all, has there been any conversation at all? And I understand the Global Center is connected to the Convention Center, it's connected to the Hilton, they're all. But has there been any conversation at all that we engage in a public-private partnership and maybe sell off the Global Health Center to raise money to put towards the jail? Has there been any conversations about that?
Councilwoman Baker, not that I'm aware of. I don't know if Bob has a different understanding.
Just putting it out there.
Okay, any comments? Are people comfortable with what I suggested?
Yes.
Okay, so hearing nothing to the contrary, we're gonna simply hold this legislation in committee. It's well discussed. I think we now know what it does and what it doesn't do, and when the right time comes, we can bring it back here and get it passed pretty quickly. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So Resolution 2022-0008 is held in committee, and we will move on to Resolution 2022-0045.
Resolution number 2022-0045, authorizing an agreement with the Ohio Department of Administrative Services, Office of Information Technology, in the amount not to exceed $1 million for data center co-location services.
Good afternoon, Janelle Green, Department of IT. This agreement is a renewal of services that the county has with the state of Ohio for co-location services. At the SOC, which is the State of Ohio Computer Center, the county has a number of internal infrastructure from racks with servers, switches, virtual servers, SQL clusters, and it's our main head for our VoIP environment that sits there. So we are requesting to renew this contract for an additional 5 years to allow us to maintain those services there on a separate power grid. The original contract we entered into in January of 2017 for 5 years for $1.75 million. This agreement is at $1 million for 5 years. So there is some savings there based upon what our spend is. The agreement includes the server space that the rack space, that we maintain there, plus electrical charges, security, and access for our staff to go down and maintain those servers. So again, we'd like to renew that agreement with the state.
So my understanding is that when we originally did this, that there were a number of alternatives as to how we could have handled this, and that this turned out to be considerably less expensive than most of the other alternatives. Is that correct?
That is correct. That was a phenomenal savings that we got. The original startup costs were about $350,000 a year. We've seen that tail off as we finally kind of fine-tuned what we have down there. So looking at our total spend that we've had down there, it's less than about $200,000 a year. So we wanted to make sure we brought that number down.
Questions by my colleagues? Councilman Gallagher.
What was the original contract in years?
The original contract in years?
In years.
It was a 5-year agreement.
Thank you.
Any other questions? So we're already past 1/1/2022. I presume that the state has allowed us to continue regular operations while this contract is working its way through the system. Is that correct?
That is correct. Given that we got the contract very late from the state, they have given us some grace on getting this approved, but we would request the waiver of the additional readings if possible.
I would also support that. We want to do anything that's easily achievable to facilitate good relations with our partners in Columbus. So if there's not anything else, I would welcome a motion on this resolution with recommendation for second reading suspension.
I'll make that motion.
It's been moved and seconded to refer Resolution 2022-0045 to the full council with recommendation to leadership to place it on the agenda for final passage at the next council meeting. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say nay. The ayes have it. The resolution is referred. Thank you very much for your presentation. Okay, and we're going to now go to our final item of the day, which is the report by Director Parfiowitz on the 2021 results of operations. I always consider this to be a very important report because this is one that's based on actual numbers and not projections, and so we can see exactly where we were financially at a particular point in time.
Good afternoon again. Walter Parfiowitz from the Fiscal Office, Office of Budget Management. Hold on just a Okay, first of all, thank you for allowing me the opportunity to present the 2021 results of operations. Overall, I'm happy to report it's a good report. We ended with operating surpluses in both the general fund and the Health and Human Services levy fund. The general fund revenues continue to improve. We had significant underspending in both the general fund and the levy expenditures. We continue to experience significant staff loss. Between 2020 and 2021, we lost 529 or 7.3% of our staff. I have a slide later in the presentation where I'll go over the major contributors to this. And we ended with ending cash balances that exceed our required reserve requirements. So with that, I just want to go over a couple of highlights. I know they're small on the screen, but I'll just go through them very quickly. We did accomplish a lot this year. We appropriated opioid funding, a one-time bonus for employees who participated in the furlough, funding for capital items, including the ERP, the new juvenile court security system, the old juvenile court building where there was some abatement and security work, and a corrections consultant. We funded the creation of the new Department of Equity and Inclusion. We provided a contribution to the Ballpark Improvement Fund, a one-time bonus for vaccinated employees, and an incentive for Sherwin-Williams. At the same time, we received a dividend check from the Bureau of Workers' Compensation. We received CARES Act funding for emergency rental assistance. We also received American Rescue Plan Act funding to continue to respond to COVID-19. We transferred $21 million in American Rescue Plan Act funding to the general fund for eligible personnel costs. And finally, we approved a number of items: the 2022 alternative tax budget, the 2022 tax rates, the issuance of bonds for improvements at Progressive Field, and last but not least, the 2022-2023 biennial budget. So with that, I'll just go right into the general fund. For 2021, the general fund ended with an operating surplus, $17.7 million. Includes operating revenue of $531.3 million, operating expenditures of $408.9 million, and subsidies of $104.7 million. It's all in the actual column. I think all the slides are basically formatted the same. Next, we'll look at general fund revenue. For 2021, general fund ended with $531.3 million in revenue, $93.1 million or 21.2% more than budget. The larger variances were in charges for services, intergovernmental revenue, other revenue, and sales taxes. Charges for services ended at $93.4 million, which is $12.8 million or 5.9% over budget. Much of this improvement was due to continued recovery from COVID-19 and county operations getting back to normal. Most of the increase was in county fees, including auditor fees, treasurer fees, conveyance fees, recording fees, all collected by the county fiscal office. Intergovernmental revenue ended at $55 million, which is $7.2 million or 15.2% over budget. This includes both public defender and local government funds, which both came in higher than budget. Other revenue ended at $45.2 million, which is $21.2 million or 88.6% over budget. The primary driver here was the $21 million transfer from the American Rescue Plan Act for eligible personnel costs. Sales taxes ended at $291.3 million, which is $52.8 million or 22.2% over budget. Sales tax collections through May of 2021 remained constant each month, averaging about $22 million, but increased to an average of approximately $26 million each month for the remainder of the year after. General fund expenditures. So this slide summarizes general fund expenditures by the budget lines, which are personnel services, other expenditures, and subsidies. Overall expenditures ended at $513.6 million, which is $89.8 million or 14.9% under budget. The pieces, personnel services, ended at $273.6 million, which is $24.2 million or 8.1% under budget. Other expenditures ended at $135.3 million, which is $61.1 million or 31.1% under budget. And finally, subsidies ended at $104.7 million, which is $4.5 million or 4.1% under budget. So this slide, I like putting this slide together because it details by department the departments that contributed the most to the surplus. So this slide details larger departments that contributed to the $89.8 million general fund expenditure surplus. Approximately 48.5 of the $89.8 million surplus is in county executive departments, 28.4 is in elected official, and 8.5 million is in boards and commissions. Again, the slide highlights departments with larger surpluses within each group. Major contributors include the fiscal office, the sheriff's office, the prosecutor's office, all the courts, and the Veterans Services Commission. Let me just say the majority of the surplus is due to vacancies and lower than expected spending in the other areas, primarily professional services and client services. So next I'll go over general fund reserves. Originally, we had $14 million in budgeted reserves on our cash in the general fund, and we did not use any of the budgeted reserves. This slide summarizes general fund ending cash balance. So we started the year with the beginning balance of $191.8 million. We had operating revenue totaling $531.3 million. Operating expenditures totaled $408.9, subsidies to the other funds totaled $104.7, and we ended 2021 with a cash balance of $209.5 million. This ending cash balance is $92.8 million more than the cash reserve requirement of $119.2 million. So we ended the year in compliance with our county code. So at this point, I'd like to shift to the Health and Human Services Levy Fund. So for 2021, the Health and Human Services Levy Fund ended with an operating surplus as well of $17.2 million. This includes operating revenue of $285.2 million and operating expenditures and subsidies totaling $268 million. This slide summarizes the Health and Human Services levy revenue. Overall, Health and Human Services levy revenue ended at $285.2 million, or 2.1 million, 0.7% under budget.
So, Director, what was the other revenue of $325,000 that was budgeted but not received?
That other revenue was attributable to one of the departments within Health and Human Services. The issue, Councilman Miller, here is that a number of operating budgets within Health and Human Services were budgeted within the levy fund inappropriately. So what we've been doing all year long is shifting the revenues that didn't belong in this fund and the expenditures that didn't belong in this fund out. So the 325 really should have been budgeted in the Human Services Fund. I believe that was relating to homeless services. So the revenue was actually received there, not within the Health and Human Services levy fund.
Okay, so this is an accounting correction and
It
doesn't
is.
really affect anything
Absolutely.
going on financially.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So just two categories here. Intergovernmental ended at $16.8 million. That's primarily the homestead credit. And then property taxes ended at $268.4 million. So this slide summarizes Health and Human Services levy expenditures by budget line. Overall expenditures total $268 million, which is $12.1 million or 4.3% under budget. Personnel services ended at $77,000, and other expenditures ended at $13.2 million, and subsidies ended at $254.8 million. So notice there's no budget for personnel services or other expenditures because we moved those budgets to the respective fund where they belonged. But at the end of the year, we still had expenditures posting here that we were not able to clear by the end of the year. The budgets for these personnel expenditures and also other expenditures were included in the levy subsidy budget. So my comment was, yeah, as you may recall, last year we attempted to move all operating expenditures out of the Health and Human Services levy fund, but at the year end, $13.2 million remained in the fund. At year end, the Health and Human Services levy subsidies were reduced to offset these operating expenditures by the same $13.2 million. The net result was the overall $12.1 million surplus. So again, another slide that details the larger departments that contributed to the overall $12.1 million surplus. Larger contributors included juvenile court, child support, early childhood, and also we did have a budgeted but not transferred repayment to the general fund of $5 million. All departments except Children and Family Services ended with surpluses, primarily due to vacancies and lower than expected spending and other expenditures, including contractual and client services. Children and Family Services had a slight deficit, and it's due primarily to placement costs for children in county custody. Same as the general fund, we did have a reserve, which typically we don't have on the levy side, but we did set aside $15 million for COVID-19 expenses. And just as in the general fund, we did not use any of the reserves. So this slide summarizes the ending cash balance in the Health and Human Services levy fund. We started the year with the beginning cash balance of $14.4 million. Total revenue was $285.2 million. Other expenditures and subsidies totaled $268 million, and we ended 2021 with a cash balance of $31.6 million. The ending cash balance is $8.8 million more than the cash reserve requirement of $22.9 million. And just as we did in the general fund, we are in compliance with the county code requirement here as well. So both operating accounts at this point are in good financial position. So at this point, I'm ready to move on to the all funds section. And I only have a couple of slides on the all funds, and then I'll provide some detail on the staffing loss numbers.
Yes, you may. This be a
Thanks.
good time for a break.
Thanks. And just trying to follow you on this, do you keep track after 2024 when the subsidy, the ARPA money, is in the budget and allocated and spent? So what does our budget look like then? I'm not sure, looking at these numbers here, if you back all that out to show us how healthy our budget stands without the ARPA money.
Oh, Councilwoman Baker, the only dollars that are in this budget that are ARPA related are the $21 million that we reimbursed the general fund for the 505 staff that came on between March 3rd and December 31st. There's nothing else in these numbers.
That's good to know. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So, Director, I know there were a number of one-time items in 2021 which you presented. Can you tell us what one-time items we're anticipating at this time in 2022?
At this point in time, we don't have any one-time items anticipated in this budget.
My other question is, there's been a lot of talk about the inflation, that it's running anywhere from 5 to 7% on an annual basis. And my question is, to what extent so far are we seeing the impact of this in the cost of contracts and outside personal services and purchases of goods and equipment?
I believe from our activity in 2021, it's very difficult to gauge that with the underspending that we have seen, and there is really nothing built in to 2022 and 2023 for inflationary increases. We did include the 2% cost of living in those budgets, but there was no real parameter built in for the contracts and the other services that the county provides.
Okay, well, we'll keep an eye on that.
Absolutely.
Okay,
May I ask one follow-up?
please proceed.
So the cash reserve that we have of $119 million, that is CARES Act, is that right? Those are dollars that were replaced for loss of revenue? Is that where most of that is coming from?
I'm sorry, Councilwoman Baker, the 100.
Ending cash balance for the cash reserve
Yeah.
at $119 million?
Well, the cash reserve requirement at 25% on the general fund is $119.2 million.
All right, then the 209, I should say.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that primarily from the CARES Act reimbursement of lost?
Oh, yeah, I believe a lot of it was, because in 2020, we did that big transfer of about $90 million from what I recall. Yeah. That was CARES Act, not American
CARES
Rescue.
Right.
Correct.
So we have CARES Act that's in this, and then ARPA money yet to come. Just wanted to, thank you.
You're welcome.
Anything else? Okay. All funds.
Okay, let me proceed. All funds. So revenue on all funds basis totaled $1.7 billion, which is $257.3 million, or 17.2% over budget. The major contributors to this revenue surplus are in the box on the left. I just tried to summarize things on an all funds basis. So we have a chart on the left that goes over the revenue, the performers, the funds that performed and contributed. And to the right, we just have a pie chart that allocates revenue by program, I believe. So the general fund, as we discussed, added $93.1 million to the surplus. The Board of Developmental Disabilities Fund added $31.1 million to the surplus. A lot of this was just in reconciling items and timing. You know, they received a 2017 and 18 cost settlement report that reimbursed them for $32.4 million. The Public Assistance Fund, on the other hand, had a deficit of about $34 million. These are reduced federal and state reimbursements due to lower spending in children's services, child support, and human services. And then the biggest piece of it was the CARES Act and American Rescue Plan Act funds that we did receive this year. We got $25.5 million in CARES Act money for emergency rental assistance. And as you know, we have $120 million in American Rescue Plan Act money that came in this year. None of those were budgeted. So this slide, similar to the revenue slide, it summarizes expenditures. So expenditures totaled $1.5 billion, which is $348 million, or 18% under budget. These surpluses are all resulted from vacancies and underspending in other expenditures, and again, major contributors to this expenditure surplus are in the box on the left, and they include general fund had a surplus of 89.8. The Health and Human Services Levy Fund had a $12.1 million surplus. Public Works, the sanitary area, $23.1 million surplus. Public Works Road and Bridge, $30.6 million surplus. Board of Developmental Disabilities, $14.5 million surplus. The Fiscal Office, $37.4 million surplus. Human Resources, $49.3 million surplus. Children's Services Fund had a $21.7 million surplus, and Human Services had a $58.3 million surplus. I can go over some of the variances if you'd like as well for the respective funds. So the ending cash balance. So we started the year with $916.9 million on an all funds basis. Revenue came in $1.7 billion. Other expenditures totaled $1.5 billion. And we ended 2021 with a cash balance of $1.1 billion. And there's no reserve requirement on an all funds basis.
So the ending cash balance is larger than we've typically seen. And my question is whether you think that might contribute to an outperformance on investment earnings. Because even though we're in a lower interest rate environment, if you have a larger base to work with, it should get you some additional money.
I would agree with you, Councilman Miller, but you know, from what we've been hearing from Meter and the results of what they've provided us, you know, I think that what we've budgeted in investment earnings are pretty solid.
Okay, I know that the prediction for 2021 was quite close. We were just a little bit short, but it was very close.
So the next slide, and this is my final slide, is on basically on staffing, so that everyone could see the final numbers. So for 2020 to 21, we lost 529 FTEs, or 7.3% of our staff. This slide just simply summarizes the major contributors to the staff reduction. It doesn't tie out exactly to 529. It's just a few short, but the major contributors are in the Sheriff's Department. They lost 196. And the notes that I have here are primarily corrections officers. The Department of Health and Human Services lost 133 staff, and these would be social workers, case workers, and support officers. Common Pleas Court lost 24, primarily probation officers. Juvenile Court lost 30, primarily detention officers. Board of Elections lost 98, and these are primarily temporary election staff. And then Board of Developmental Disabilities lost 30. You know, this is their continued transition from providing direct services. In the end, it tallies up to 529. It's an overall reduction from 2020 of 7.3%. a lot of this, you've seen in the general fund and the levy fund, even on an all funds basis, a lot of the underspending is in the personnel areas. Very much reflective of the number. And that is my last slide. So this concludes my presentation.
Okay. Ms. Baker.
So I know this is a moment in time. The sheriff's office has been pretty aggressive in hiring fairs and different types of innovative ways to encourage employees. So put this 196 in perspective. How high were we in the loss? And is this considerably down from where we were, or is it the same or even?
Well, let me just state that this is the last pay in 2020 compared to the last pay in 2021. So this is 196 additional staff that were lost just in that time frame. I do have the number from the prior year.
It was pretty high. It was higher than 200.
So that would be in the actual results of operations report. The very last page breaks the FTEs down by department. So the sheriff in 2020 had 1,279 employees, and in 2021 ended at 1,083. And it's been sort of a continuous decline. 2018, they had 1,259 employees. They did bump up in 19 to 1,330, but then it's been a steady decline ever since. Went from 1,330 in 2019 to 1,279 in 2020 to 1,083 in 2021. So between the 2 years, they lost 196 staff.
Look at that page and how.
Yeah, it's the very last page of the report.
Same with Health and Human Services for mostly social workers and caseworkers. As that also is over a span of 1 year.
1 year, correct.
Is that also a declining number from 2019? 2020, is that?
Yeah, those are basically the same type of pattern that the sheriff's office had. So for 2018, for example, these would be social workers at Children and Family Services. 2018, they had 834. 2019, slight bump up to 842. 2020, they started the decline again, 798. And then in 2021, they're down to 730. And basically the same pattern goes for Job and Family Services. That's primarily where the caseworkers are, and also for child support.
And I would imagine the pandemic certainly played into these
absolutely.
roles, and
Absolutely.
2022 looks like a better year. We may see those numbers just go up for that reason.
Yeah, I've got a small department of staff myself, and I've got those same numbers.
So, welcome. Given all the discussion we had on this during the budget time, I'm going to be gentle in the way that I say this, but the staffing numbers certainly suggest that we're not going to find ourselves in trouble anytime soon for the fact that in some cases we budgeted for a little less than all the vacancies being filled.
I would agree, Councilman Miller. I mean, overall, we're at 6,711 employees at the end of 2021. When we tally up what was budgeted for 22, it's 7,187. So there is an increase in there.
So I think at this time we probably have it pretty well covered. Any other questions or comments on the results of operations? I would like to thank you, Director, for bringing in a very clear and concise presentation that gives us a very very good idea of where we are at this time, and we're certainly in very good shape, largely because of federal largesse. Ms. Baker was right in raising some questions about, well, what is the sustainability of current operations? I know that's where you're going, and the sense I have is that that we're doing decently well on that too, but it's something that constantly bears watching, because even if you have money in the bank, if you're spending more than you're taking in over an extended period of time, well, you're going to draw down the money that you have in the bank. But fortunately, that doesn't seem to be the case at this time, but it requires continuous monitoring.
If I may, Chair.
Yes.
We also need to be careful that we understand this is one-time money, that any programs that we may initiate, those dollars will have to come out of the general fund in order to keep that going. So we do need to be careful of what's ARPA, what's CARES, and what's general fund, so that we don't overextend. Good intentions, but that we can pay for it. After all, this is one-time money is seen its way clear.
I'm in support of your concept on this. I see the ARPA funds as being intended for one-time things that will be beneficial to our community on a long-term basis, but not create continuing obligations. Any other questions or comments? Okay, thank you very much. Does anybody have any miscellaneous business? I'll just make a quick comment that we're only about 11 days away from when hopefully we're going to begin the WFM payroll go live on ERP. It remains on schedule to the last that I've heard, so we'll be watching that closely. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All those in favor say aye.